Ever thought a family reunion could change everything, but that day when my mother revealed a secret I had no idea was buried beneath the surface, nothing would ever be the same. What I thought was a normal summer afternoon quickly turned into the revelation of a lifetime. I'd always trusted my mother, assumed I knew her completely, but at that moment, I saw my mother in a way I had never seen her before: vulnerable, scared, and hiding something huge. Little did I know, this confession would not only shatter my perception of her, but also change my entire life. Before we dive into today's story, let me introduce myself. I am Sarah, 24 years old. If you are enjoying this content, do not forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Now let's get into today's story, one that will completely change how you see family secrets. It was a perfect summer afternoon, the kind of day we all looked forward to. The smell of sizzling burgers mixed with the laughter of my cousins playing in the yard. The adults were gathered around the grill, chatting about old times, while the children ran around, creating a cacophony of noise that filled the yard. My mother, always the life of the party, was hosting as usual. The picnic table was laden with food, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. But despite the normalcy of the situation, something about my mother's behavior struck me as off. She was sitting quietly in the corner of the porch, her eyes not quite focused on anything. I assumed she was just exhausted from the preparations, but as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. My mother was the one who made these events feel like home, but today, she seemed distant, her usually confident and warm presence now replaced with something colder, something more reserved. I caught her looking out the window a few times, and there was an air of unease around her. It wasn't just the tiredness, there was something deeper, something unspoken. As the day stretched on, my mother's behavior became harder to ignore. She was barely speaking, responding to questions with short, vague answers. I watched her from across the room as she fiddled with her napkin, her hands trembling slightly. When she passed me the salad, I noticed her fingers shake ever so slightly. I wondered if I was imagining it, but it was hard to ignore. She usually had such control, such poise, but now she seemed almost fragile. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding anyone's gaze, and I began to wonder, was this just exhaustion or was there something more at play? My mother had always been the pillar of strength in our family, the one who took care of everything. But today, she was falling apart in a way I had never seen before. I couldn't help but wonder if she was hiding something, something that was making her this nervous, this out of sorts. There was a sense of tension in the air that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just my mother. It was the entire atmosphere of the reunion. Even the laughter of my cousins seemed hollow, as if it were covering up something dark beneath the surface. Then, in the middle of a lull in conversation, my mother suddenly stood up. The noise in the room faded to a dull silence, and I watched as everyone turned their attention to her. She seemed smaller, somehow, as though the weight of the moment was physically pulling her down. She cleared her throat softly, but there was no denying the tremor in her voice. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice shaking. "Something I should have told you years ago." Her words hung in the air like an unsolved puzzle, and the room grew eerily still. Everyone was watching her, waiting for the truth, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. "I've been hiding something from all of you," she whispered, her hands shaking as she clutched the edge of the table. "A secret I couldn't bear to tell you." My heart raced in my chest as I waited for her to continue. I could see the strain in her eyes, the guilt, the fear. And then she said the words that would change everything. "Your father isn't your father." The room seemed to spin around me. My mind tried to make sense of her words, but the shock left me paralyzed. What did she mean? What was she saying? The realization hit me like a tidal wave, but before I could process it, my mother was breaking down in front of us, tears streaming down her face. As the room buzzed with disbelief and confusion, something inside me snapped. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling, but my voice was calm, even as my heart raced. "I already know, Mom," I said. The room went silent. Every single eye turned toward me, shocked, confused. My mother froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. She hadn't expected this. She had just laid bare a secret she had carried for years, but now I was the one who was speaking. "You knew?" she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "Yes," I answered quietly. "I've known for years." There was a stunned silence that followed my words, as if the weight of the confession had shifted from my mother to me. The shock on my family's faces was palpable. They hadn't seen this coming. But for me, it was like everything finally made sense. I knew for a long time, I said, my voice steady. I didn't want to confront it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. But I've seen the signs. My mother was still in shock, her tears falling freely. She had expected anger, maybe disbelief, but not this calmness, not this quiet understanding. How? She asked, her voice trembling. How did you know? I just did, I replied softly. I paid attention to the details, the way you looked at us, the way you acted around certain people. I didn't want to make it a thing, but I've known for years. The room was still silent as my family processed the enormity of the moment. The tension that had been building for years was finally out in the open, but it wasn't as explosive as I had feared, and instead it felt like a release, a moment of truth. My mother's tears continued to flow, and the room was filled with stunned silence. My brother stood up abruptly, his face flushed with emotion. Why didn't you tell us? He asked, his voice breaking with anger and confusion. Why keep something like that from us? My mother's gaze shifted toward him, and she shook her head slowly. I didn't know how, she whispered. I was scared, scared of losing you all. The weight of her words hung in the air. My father, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke. His voice was soft, but there was hurt in it. Why didn't you trust us? He asked. We could have handled it. I looked around at my family, my brother, my father, my mother, and I saw the pain on their faces. We were all struggling with the truth, but I was struggling with something else I had known for so long, but somehow I hadn't processed it. I had accepted it, but now that it was out in the open, the weight of it was crushing. The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't just the secret that hurt, it was the years of pretending, the years of avoiding the truth. Sitting there, listening to the pain in my mother's voice, I realized something profound. The truth had never been the problem. The real issue was the silence, the years of not addressing the reality of our lives. As much as the truth had hurt, it was also freeing. We had been carrying this burden without even knowing it. The moment we confronted it was the moment I felt the weight lift off my chest. It wasn't about blaming anyone. It was about understanding, about acknowledging the hurt and moving forward. I could finally breathe again, and I knew that despite the pain, I had grown. I wasn't the same person I had been before that day. I had faced the truth, and that was the first step in healing. As the evening drew to a close, I noticed something different in the air. The tension had faded, replaced by something more powerful: understanding. My mother and I sat together, the silence between us no longer uncomfortable but peaceful. We didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, we could finally be honest with each other. I knew that healing would take time, but we had started. We were no longer bound by the weight of unspoken words. The reunion had not been what I expected, but in some ways, it had been exactly what we needed. It was the beginning of something new, something better. Together, as a family, we would move forward, no longer hiding behind secrets, no longer afraid to face the truth.